bit about what I'm doing in PNG, and then I'm going to share about the role of training local people in Bible translation. Next slide, please.
Okay, right.
I am working with the Kanja language group in PNG. Sorry, can you go? Oh yes, that's right.
Okay, there is
yes, the map, yes. Okay. I'm working with the Kanja language group in PNG. It is located in Western Province and is the most southwest language group in PNG. It consists of 3 villages, Bondabol, Bulla and Darai, and I've been living in Bondabol village, the one with the green circle on it on the map. Okay, next slide please. In this area, the seasons vary greatly. So the dry season is very dry and it is often hard to find water. Yet the wet season is very wet. The village itself is on dry ground and they build their gardens on dry ground, but everywhere else is surrounded by swamp. And they'll use their canoes to travel everywhere. Okay, next slide please. I live with my host family in the village and we go and collect water at the dynamite hole, which is about 10 minutes outside of the village. I go with the women to collect water and we carry it back on our heads. This can be a little bit challenging, especially in the wet season, because we're often sloshing through the water from the swamps, often halfway up our calves. The women can carry a lot more than I can though. Okay, next slide please. During this term I've continued learning the Kanja language and culture. This has been a bit more challenging due to COVID interrupting my village time and also needing to do house building logistics when I have been in the village. I've managed to keep it up by doing, when I couldn't be in the village, by doing vocab practice, using recordings and language learning games. In the village, I have focused on production and telling stories. The kids love to hear stories and they love to hear the same story over and over and over again, which is great practice for me. Towards the end of the trip, I reached a stage where I could tell basic Bible stories in Kanja. The kids love these. Next slide, please. Another thing that I've spent a lot of time on this term is working on papers about the language and culture. Wycliffe was founded on the belief that a good study of language and culture is important for good Bible translation. So this term I've completed a paper about the sounds of the language and the alphabet, and I've also been working on the grammar paper. The grammar paper will take the entire length of the project to do, but this term I reached the first milestone. And there'll be more papers that I need to write. Next slide, please. When I first started working with the Kanja language group, I used games like memory that I would play with the kids to help me with my language learning. But as I've progressed in my language learning, these are no longer useful for me. However, of course, the kids still want to play the games. And so I changed them to, instead of being focused on language learning for me, to instead be focused on helping the kids learning to read Kanja. The kids are taught to read English in school, but the Kanja can be slightly different because it has some different sounds, and so that's new to them. And during this time I've seen them grow in their ability to recognise and read Kanja words. Next slide, please. One of my main goals for this term was to get a village house built. This was originally planned for 2020, but was delayed due to COVID. In May of last year, I went out with a sawmill and an operator to cut the wood. Cutting wood requires a lot of manpower, and the people in the village helped a lot with this. During the trip, however, there was ongoing tension within the landowning family. Towards the end of the trip, I was told that the problem was that some family members from another village were not happy that my host father was giving me the wood for free, and the family needed to have a meeting to discuss this and come to a conclusion. I was hoping that the meeting would happen in time and I would still be able to build the house. However, it did not, and I had to postpone the plans to build the house. I then planned to go out with a representative from the organisation's leadership to discuss the problem. Next slide, please. The trip was useful. We talked with several people about the problem. We were told a lot of different stories. It is not unusual in this culture to hide problems, and things are caused shame by creating false stories. It is hard to know what is actually true. It seems like there is a bigger problem going on within the landowning family that is at the root of the problem. Culturally, land problems are common in PNG. Land is traditionally owned and is generally not sold or transferred. It is also often owned by a family group rather than an individual. This system worked well when PNG economy was based on trade and barter rather than money. But with the rapid cultural change since Western contact, it has gotten more complicated. And there have been more issues over land and the use of land. Working these things out is often complicated, and it may take them some time. The plan now, since I was due for furlough anyway, is to give them time to work this out. I'm hopeful that they'll be able to work it out, even if it takes a while. In PNG culture, having good relationships is highly valued, so they are motivated to work out differences with one another. However, I have no guarantees. If for some reason this is not solved, then working with the country language group should still be able to go ahead. It just will look a little bit different to what I originally planned. There are several options. Some of these would still involve building a village house. I plan to return to PNG in January. In order to do this, I need to be at 100% support. I'm currently at about 75 to 80%. Next slide, please. Over time, the method that is used for Bible translation has changed. Originally, what would happen is the expat would go into the language group and learn the language and culture, and then do the Bible translation themselves with some help from local people. These days, whilst learning language and culture is still important, the expat has become the translator advisor, who then trains local people to do the actual translation, and so you now have local translators, and the advisor then advises them and guides and helps them and checks the translation. There are some advantages to this. The local people will always know the language better than any of us can ever learn it. And this results in a more natural translation, which is a translation that sounds the way it should in the language. So think of how English can sometimes sound when someone who isn't a native speaker is speaking it, compared to a native speaker. That's the sort of difference. Another advantage is that if for some reason the expat has to leave before the translation work is completed, the community can continue on their own if the local people have been trained. So an example of this is the Rumba language, which is one of few languages up from where the Kanja language group is. The expats who were working with them had to leave due to health reasons. But the local translator, Katawa Baku, kept on working, and he kept on translating, and he has translated on his own the first draft of the entire New Testament. And now another expat is working with the Rumba language group part-time to help them get the translation through the checking process so that it can be published. Next term, I'm hoping to start the process of training local translators. This involves a combination of training courses, but also actually doing translation, so learning by doing. And gradually over time, the local translators, as they learn and grow in their ability to translate, will become more independent. And then the translator advisor's role, which will be my role, becomes more of checking the translation and always being there to help and advise as needed. Along with training people in translation, we also train people in literacy and scripture use. Now I'm going to share about a couple of workshops I've run in the village. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, that's the right side, sorry, go back. Okay. In 2015, I ran a writer's workshop in the village. This is a workshop designed to help people to write and illustrate books in their language. The people really enjoyed getting to learn the alphabet. They had an alphabet design workshop before I allocated, during which some of the representatives from the community had designed an alphabet for their language, but they didn't really know what to do with it. So this course gave them an opportunity of something they could do with it. And they kept on asking, when are we going to learn the alphabet? When are we going to learn the alphabet? During the course, one of the participants gave me a great idea for helping them with editing stories, which is an important part of writing any story. They asked me to read their story, and when I read their story, it helped him see the mistakes, because they know their language, but the actual writing system and the spelling is new, And so they would always just pronounce it the way it's supposed to be pronounced because they know how it's supposed to be pronounced and not realise that the spelling may not be quite right. And so that was actually what we did for the course. We would write it on the blackboard and then I would read it out and then they would stop me when there was anything that wasn't pronounced right and then they would discuss as a group what the correct spelling should be. P&G culture is very much group decision making and consensus decision making, and so making decisions as a group works well for them. Next slide, please. We have also been running culture meets scripture courses for all the language groups in the Moorhead area. This is a course designed to help people look at a cultural practice, like what happens when someone dies, and then see what are all the steps and what is behind it. So why do we do what we do? What happens if we don't do it? And then to look at scripture and see what scripture has to say about it. And then for them to make a decision as a community if there's anything they feel that they should change to help make it match scripture. The first time we ran this course, there was a group working on poisoning the creek. This is a practice where they get poison roots and they put them in the water so that the fish die and then come up and then they collect them to eat. Part of this practice is the women who are pregnant are not allowed to go into the water to get the fish because it's believed that if they do, the fish won't come up. The group realised that this was not supported in scripture and one guy was really impacted by it and at the end of the course he gave a devotion on it. We also ran this course in 2019 and we had 89 participants from 4 different language groups. The practices they looked at were sorcery, rainmaking, marriage arrangement, creation, and initiation. With a lot of these things, there's no easy answers, and they'll need to continue discussing it after the course. The plan now is to run this course a couple more times with teacher training so that local people can be trained to run the course themselves. Okay, next slide, please. In 2020, I also had the opportunity to help with running one of these courses at one of the local Bible colleges. So this was in Vale, which is about 5 hours from our main centre at Ukarumpa. This is a great opportunity because this is a good tool for all the Bible college students to be able to take with them into ministry, into the community, to help the communities they'll be serving with. Okay, next slide, please. Now I'll share about a couple of initiatives my organisation is doing in helping to train local people. PILOT stands for the Pacific Institute of Languages, Art and Translation. It is located at Ukarumpa in the Eastern Highlands, which is our main centre in PNG. It runs several courses for Papua New Guineans to train them in the task for Bible translation. These courses range from translation, biblical exegesis, biblical languages, language, literacy, computer skills, and general skills. Some comments from participants are, I now clearly see that the Bible has background meanings which I can use to interpret it accurately, if I study it well. This means that all the context of what I'm trying to teach and preach must agree with its original context. As I teach, preach, or mentor other language groups, this will help me correct or straighten anything that is wrong. That's from Gino Gideon from Milne Bay Province, who participated in the New Testament introduction course. And here's another comment from a participant. The first thing I learned when I came to the Introduction to Hebrew course was when I was given a book that was all Hebrew words and pictures. I learned I had to open the book from the back. The next thing was to learn to read from right to left. It was very hard to work out which words we were on because it was very hard to work out which way to turn the pages, and hard to flip the pages because I am right-handed. After a couple of weeks, I got used to working from right to left. I learned these things first, but it was still difficult to me. I was thinking in my head, why did I come? The next thing was learning the alphabet. Grasping the alphabet of the Hebrews was much harder than the first alphabet I learned as a child. I learned the consonants and then the vowels, and I thought things were becoming clear. And that must be good. But no, I was listening and trying to write down what was said. But then I realised my spellings were not close to the Hebrew spelling. As the weeks went by, a few pictures and words began to stick in my head, and my confidence grew in identifying a few words. But the most important thing has been translating the Hebrew into my top place. One thing I learned was that going from the original text into top place may help the people in my community, because I found out that the English translations differ in some ways. Some Bible versions have put different connotations in there, so it is good for me that I can now begin to translate straight from Hebrew into my local language. That's from Kisodori from Central Province. Next slide, please. Another initiative our organisation started a couple of years ago is called Linkrot. This stands for Linguistics Consultant Resourcing of Papua New Guinea. This is a 3-year mentor training program which is designed to provide a pathway for Papua New Guineans with a BA in linguistics to become linguistics consultants. A linguistic consultant is someone who helps people often involved in Bible translation with aspects of the language, be that the sounds of the language or the grammar, or various other aspects of the language. This course is based on the Papua New Guinean learning style, which is cyclical learning. The course, so generally that means in the 3 years they'll go through a 1-year cycle about 3 times. And this 1-year cycle consists of courses of about 1 to 3 weeks, village trips, professional development, and spiritual formation. If they do well, they can go on to an MA abroad. The goal is that they will be helping to serve Bible translation by helping expats and local translators with various aspects of the language. So sounds of the language, alphabet development, grammatical analysis, dictionary making, and the training of local translators. The first intakes was in August of 2021, and then there was a second intake in June of 2022. If anyone is interested in hearing or talking to me more about this, I'll be at the back of the Wycliffe stand after the service. And I also have prayer cards available if anyone is interested in signing up to receive my newsletter or pray for me or support me financially. Thank you.